All right, can you hear me? Yes. Well, like Mitchell, I can't see you because the lights are straight in my eyes, but what I can see looks great. And welcome to my city. I hope you're enjoying yourselves, getting out. Excellent. It's not always like this weather-wise, but we welcome you at this wonderful time of year when our summer begins, our days are very long, and we get the full blessings of the park. But here in November or February, we enjoy our parks just the same. We just wear raincoats, and that's what keeps them green. So we have a wonderful panel up here of people. Some of you would have seen them in the videos, not them, well, a couple of cases you would see them. You'd see the companies, all four organizations that they represent in those wonderful videos. And so we are blessed to have the four of them, the companies and organizations they represent, but also they're representative of so many organizations within this community that work together as a community to make our city better. So I'm just going to start with a quick story that took place just north of here, between where we are now roughly and Lake Union. In, I think it was probably the mid-90s, Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, very philanthropically minded individual, as are so many people within that company, had a vision that this area between here and South Lake Union, which was really not very developed and not very attractive, if he acquired parcels of land, we could have Seattle's version of Central Park called the Commons. So he acquired the land. He personally donated a lot of land and a lot of money and put it to the voters to see if they wanted the Commons. And the voters voted it down twice. And so that became a vibrant commercial hub, to be sure, the headquarters of Amazon, who we'll be hearing from up here with one of our esteemed panelists, big biotechnology area. However, it could have been a park, and we turned it down. So as you've enjoyed the Olmsted legacy around Seattle, and as you've seen some of our open spaces, just recognize that a lot of them have been hard-fought battles, some won, some lost. The Mountains of Sound Greenway, which Rebecca mentioned I've been involved with, has been around since 1991, and that has been a constant battle to make sure that the green space from the sound all across the mountains to the other side remains not only in public ownership to the extent it can be, but not developed in every way. So that was the origins of the Seattle Parks Foundation, which we rely upon. And so I would say for all of you out there representing large and small cities, companies, nonprofit organizations, that the battle's never over to make a great city or to make a great community, that open spaces need your help and support, just as they have here in Seattle. So with that preamble, I've got four wonderful panelists up here. We're not going to do lengthy introductions. They're going to do a little bit of a self-introduction, but I'm going to just talk about what each of them do and the organizations they represent, and then we're going to open it up with a question that'll let you tell them a little bit about why this topic is so timely for them and hopefully for you as well. So on my immediate left is Shannon Lowe, Vice President of Global Corporate Real Estate and Facilities for Amazon. He's an architect by background and has a very interesting career journey, so I will leave that to him. Next to him, we have Mari Horita, Senior Vice President for Social Impact and Government Relations for the Seattle Kraken and the Executive Director of its One Roof Foundation, what we heard about a little bit in the video. Welcome, Mari. We have next to Mari, Mark Bareka, who's Divisional Vice President for Community Advocacy and Impact for REI, and he is the president of the REI Cooperative Action Fund, which he might talk a little bit about, but raising a lot of money from customers and members of REI to magnify their impact. And on the far side, meet Maya Mendoza Ekstrom. She recently was promoted to lead the National Women's Soccer League Seattle Reign FC as its Chief Business Officer. And yes, let's give her a hand for that. She took that role as from a position she had with the Seattle Sounders Football Club, a major league soccer franchise, and was its chief operating officer. And she remains a board member of the Rave Foundation, also involved in one of the videos that you saw. So we have 4 wonderful panelists. And I'm going to start by asking them each a question that'll give you a bit of their background. And then we'll get into some questions for the group. But they all know each other a little bit. They know each other's organizations well. And I've encouraged them to interact with each other. And they know who you are broadly. And we will try and make this as relevant to you as possible. So I think I'm going to start with Mari, if that's all right. So the Kraken and its work through the One Roof Foundation has had an environmental justice focus in its community work. We saw that in the video with South Park and so on. Could you share a little bit about that work with us, and maybe more importantly, how a sports team landed with this unusual focus?
Yeah, well, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here. And I think Maya and I are here in part to share what we do, but also to provide ideas, maybe spark some ideas of how you can all go back to your cities and reach out and work with your sports teams and their nonprofits in advancing your very important work. So our environmental justice pillar at One Roof, I have to give a lot of credit to Amazon. Actually, when we were founding One Roof 4 years ago, in parallel with naming the team and the arena and building 2 facilities, we decided to have 3 impact pillars. One was helping to fight youth homelessness in this region. One was increasing access to play and play equity in this region. And then as we were thinking about what a 3rd pillar would be, and we also represented the arena, at that same time we entered into our naming rights deal with Amazon. And pursuant to that deal, we not only called our arena Climate Pledge Arena, but we adopted a very stringent and holistic sustainability commitment. And so we took that sustainability commitment, we overlaid it with our social justice focus at One Roof, and arrived at environmental justice. So, so thank you, Amazon. And that was great, but we didn't really know what that meant. And so we spent the next 6 months or so doing a lot of research and outreach, going to the CLEs on the history of environmental justice in Washington, reading public sector materials, and just doing a lot of listening. And then based on that, we formed a task force that was comprised of members of the Architects of the HEAL Act, which was Washington State's first environmental justice legislation in 2021. And they represented academia, nonprofits, public sector, and frontline communities. And they helped us understand what environmental justice is, what the needs are, how we might lean in. And a big takeaway from that was whatever they were saying, whatever it is we decide to do, to design our work around the needs of the community as articulated by the community. And I think what they meant by that is, I certainly have been guilty of, I'm sure many, sitting in a room with really great intentions and coming up with an awesome idea for another group of people who aren't represented in the room. It's like that present you get from your relative that you didn't want at all, but they thought it was really cool. So I just think it was a good lesson for us as we're talking about environmental justice in different communities, to make sure that those voices are represented in that community. And then you saw from the video, one of the women on that task force is a person named Paulina Lopez, and she runs the Duwamish River Community Coalition that actually started out 20 years ago as a community oversight group for the cleanup of the Duwamish River, which is a Superfund site. And so we're a very small entity, so we have been trying to focus most of our work in South Park. She mentioned the stats, we mentioned the stats that due to proximity to the airport and location on a Superfund site and at the crossroads of many freeways, and also because it's a community whose voice really is not present in policy and decision making, the lifespan is shorter, kids are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized because of asthma. So we work with them at their direction, buying air purifiers, doing cleanups, sponsoring events. We directed funding to the families that were displaced because of the King Tide floods. But it is a partnership, and we're really grateful to them for that. And then beyond South Park, we work with the Center for Environmental Health Equity at the University of Washington. We're doing a project with them to help it's a grant writing forum for grassroots organizations to access all those funds that were discussed yesterday. And we're also talking to a new Title I school about putting water stations in their school because they don't have potable water for the kids. So just an example of some of the work we're doing, but the takeaway really is to, I think, listen to the community and what they need and have ongoing conversations and take their lead.
Great, thank you, Mari. Mark, talk a little bit about why you and REI are interested in urban parks and green space or public space from a business perspective. With the beautiful video around Anacostia Park, many other examples, how does that align with the organization's values?
Well, as former CEO, maybe I should punt that back to you, Sally. But
I know, but I'm not a panelist, I'm a moderator.
What's transpired in the last 15 years or so. Well, actually, let me go back a little bit further. So REI Co-op, born here in Seattle over 85 years ago. I'm assuming that everybody in the room is at least somewhat familiar with REI Co-op, and I'm hoping that almost all of you are co-op members. And if you're not, we can take care of that before you go home. 85 years ago, as a co-op, we were dedicated to connecting people to nature. And for many decades, we were just in Seattle, and that meant bringing people into the Cascades, bringing them into the forests, learning, teaching, exploring, and life was good as a small co-op. Fast forward into the current century, and as Sally mentioned, 15, 20 years ago when she was CEO, she and the board looked at how the United States had evolved, and urbanization had detached more and more people from nature. REI, more than 80 years old, dedicated to connecting people to nature. But nature is retreating from people's lives. And so for the past 15, 20 years at least, we have made it a principal goal of our philanthropy, of our advocacy, of our entire business to connect people to nature closer to where they live. So this notion of urban parks, urban green, urban nature, 110% aligned with our values, with our business goals. And when I'm in an audience like this, I know I'm with friends, and I know you'll indulge a little bit more deeper dive, pontification potentially. When I think of the REI mission relative to the outdoors, I'll echo some of what Mitchell said. There are certain things about the outdoors and nature contact that are magical. Actually, they're backed up by science, but the end result is magical. It is good for the health of our individual being, for our physical health, for our mental health. It's good for the development of children. We know it's good for our communities, our places. There's a sense of attachment, a sense of pride when there's a well-curated, well-maintained green space nearby. And then we know that nowadays, with a well-managed, well-architected green space in urban areas or elsewhere, parks also serve the health of our planet, either providing cooling, filtering rain and water, cleaning the air. And so there is no other asset that we have that simultaneously delivers benefits for the health of people, health of place, health of planet. And so it is essential that we invest in, as a community, as a society, in those types of assets. There's another fun fact, and the science is also backing this up, that when we humans are in nature, nature evokes our better spirits. Our minds are calmer, cooler. We are more pro-social. We are more welcoming of others and generous to them, even if we don't know them. We are more aware of our connection to the world, to the earth, and to posterity. And so that pro-social mindset that we enjoy in nature creates a positive feedback loop to these other benefits. And in that sense, creates a future constituency of people who believe in time outside is good for people, place, and planet. So those are some of the more fundamental reasons why we support urban access to green space and nature, and why it's the joy of a lifetime for me and my colleagues at the co-op to work with people like you to try to move this movement forward, because I really believe that we're in the midst of a movement.
Thanks, Mark. One of the terms that we coined at REI early on in this process was urbaneering. We were founded by mountaineers, and there's mountaineering, but we thought we better create something new called urbaneering, and the buyers started buying products and encouraging people to get outside. So thank you, Mark. So Maya, why are you and the RAIN and the Sounders interested in urban parks and green space and public space from your business's perspective, and how does that tie into the values?
It's history, it's our culture and our values and our mission as an organization, and it's really, really, really good business. I think I'm a lifer here in Seattle, and hopefully you've seen the Olmsted legacy. We're not that old of a city, so we claim our history where we can find it. The Seattle Sounders this year are celebrating their 50th anniversary, which is a pretty remarkable milestone in professional soccer in this country. And soccer as a vehicle, as a sport, no matter where you go in the world, is this hyper-local thing. It is, in many respects, the most, best, truest reflection of the values of a community. And for those of you who are aware of what soccer is in other parts of the world, there are major cities where there are 5 or 6 teams, and you could be standing on a street corner and have 5 or 6 different fan bases demonstratively demonstrating the distinction culturally between the street corners they stand on. And so it's that obligation and that reflection and connection to community that's sort of ever present in soccer. I think for us as well, coming from this part of the world, this idea, this notion of sustainability, of intention in our action, that our impacts impact our community, and you saw it in the video, but now as we think about the business, we derive a lot of value from this community. We rely on this community to support us in a lot of different ways, and so what is the other side of that bargain, and how do we show up? The history piece is also interesting because we are part of the Green Sports Alliance, which started here in Seattle. It was another legacy of Paul Allen and his intentional actions around the environment and wanting to create a legacy of stewardship in the sports community. So Lumen Field, T-Mobile Park, the teams that played here in Seattle, along with the Trailblazers in Portland, formed the Green Sports Alliance, which is now thousands of members across the world. They just had the national conference in LA a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of investment happening in this space. When we look at global sport hosting in soccer in our community, there's a lot of intention and investment in this space. If we look to the World Cup coming here to Seattle in 2 years' time, one of the early requirements for the process was to have a sustainability program, to have a point of view on how we might host that many people in space in a way that is responsible to the environment and to the place that we all inhabit. Those are the kinds of conversations that are happening through soccer. And so it's both this historical, local expression of values coming from this part of the world, and also this connection to a global game where these conversations are sort of a requirement of doing business. And then I think for us, as we look at this, we are a values-led organization on the Sounder side. We have a mission to create moments, enrich lives, and unify through soccer. And we have to do that through the process of inquiry. We are an organization that travels a lot on airplanes. We have to understand what that carbon impact looks like. The women's team is an organization that travels a lot on airplanes. They care about what their carbon impact looks like. When the NWSL teams were in the bubble, they were the first bubble league to play during COVID. Lou Barnes, our captain, one of our long-standing members, actually an original member of the RAIN, was fed up with the amount of single plastic bottles that were being provided to the team. And so in COVID and in the bubble, attempted to get all of the NWSL teams to remove single-use plastic. So they didn't take the little shampoo bottles. They were having Walmart deliver in, and Amazon probably, deliver in big shampoo, trying to do and that inquiry has persisted. And so now if you actually are in the bowels of Lumen Field, there are pallets of aluminum water bottles because the Reign players refuse to use single plastic bottles that are often given, and on the road they make sure that they are not leaving behind plastic when they go to other places. And so it's this intentional act and consistent inquiry that's a piece of the people that inhabit our space as well. And I think as you look at the business community inside of sports, all of us are trying to capture attention and new fans and the next fans. There's this what's coming next sort of constancy with how we orient ourselves. And if we're looking at that, we're looking at Gen Alpha, which are my 9-year-old and 5-year-old at home, who live in a world that have an expectation that the brands that they consume and associate with will do something to make the environment better. Because all of us, as the generations that have come before, have kind of left them with a mess. And so their expectation in their consumption habits, in where they go, where they spend their money, how they're driving their parents to spend their money, is coming with this expectation that we are global stewards and we are going to take care of our environment. That matters to us then in how we occupy space. And that's where this all connects. As we look at sort of where our fan base is, we have an obligation to report to our fans, to our community, of how we occupy space. And so we think about sort of the legacy of inquiry and how it translates into public spaces and private spaces. Our training facility we just built down at the old Boeing headquarters in Renton, just south of here. We put 4 fields in and took out some trees. That was sort of how you build soccer fields. You can't have a big giant tree in the middle of a soccer field. Our fields are adjacent to a wetland. And so as we were looking at how we lay these fields out, we had to confront, again through inquiry, how we are occupying space. So we made intentional choices where we could. We realized that 70-80% of those trees were invasive species. So when we're replacing tree canopy in that part of Renton, we're going to replace it with appropriate native species. We worked with Salmon Safe to ensure that the constituent materials and the 2 artificial surfaces that we have, because we have 2 natural grass surfaces and 2 artificial, don't include crumb rubber because it's a neurobiotoxin to salmonoids, and the wetlands that are adjacent to our field site flow into a riparian watershed that supports salmon habitat. So it's this constant set of inquiry, whether it's Lou Barnes in the bubble saying it is not okay that we have this much plastic and making change inside of that environment, or the systemic way in which we look at a campus and a training facility and all the decisions and little points of impact that we have along the way. And then ultimately, as we look to sort of how we show up in community, and where we are building small fields for play, that inquiry continues. And so if we are creating runoff in one of those communities because we're putting a non-permeable surface, a hard-court surface down, where that water goes matters to us, and what is built infrastructure around those field sites to support that water is important to us as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya. All right, last certainly not least, Shannon, representing Amazon. Seattle is fortunate to be where Amazon was founded, or at least as it set down its roots, it was here. And people associate that with Seattle, but you're actually in many, many places, as you reminded me. So talk a little bit about Amazon's interest in urban parks and green space and public space. Why is it good for business? How does it align with your values personally as well as the company?
Thank you, Sally. And as Rebecca said, thank you for your service to, by the way, to this country and in your service to REI. Let's see. So just for clarity's sake and context, my boss, John Shuttler, and I run our global corporate office portfolio. That's about 65 million square feet in about 70-ish countries around the world. It's for our roughly 325,000 employees, corporate office employees. A long time ago, before I joined the company, Jeff Bezos and my boss John made a really concerted decision that I thought was really prescient. And they decided that despite trends that were happening around them in other companies, that Amazon was going to be a corporate located in urban centers. That's where they were going to have their corporate strategy. And while that was mainly focused in Seattle, because I don't think they realized just how big they might grow, it had a really big effect globally, including obviously here in Puget Sound, on a whole number of sort of knock-on effects or ripples that have huge impacts on sustainability, on public health, and local economies. And I think that's really profound in the sense that, when you look at here locally, one of our, I think, most innovative and really quite simple but still impactful urban policies is our urban growth boundary. There's a lot of room where one could go, and yet we decided we're going to stay in the city center. And that drives local economy. That also has a big impact on opportunity for housing and where people can live proximate to work, which reduces the amount of time that they're traveling and driving someplace. So it has those knock-on effects, but then it also comes with some obligations and responsibilities. And those responsibilities come in the way of us understanding how do we fit into those communities, how do we stitch ourselves in. We've become quite large, and so I think we need to be cognizant of our scale and the responsibility that comes with that scale, and we talk a lot about that often. And in one of those ways, it's really about understanding community. And I should say, for every bit that I am proud of my team and what we do in running the corporate offices, we really sit behind our community engagement team. They're extraordinary, and they do a lot of what the other panelists here have been talking about, which is really listen first. So we love to participate, but we don't want to kind of give somebody the gift from the relative that nobody wants. And so it's important that we listen to what the urbanists and what community activists and what community members want. But we know that we have a very strong Venn diagram because our employees tend to be people too. And so we know that what they're going to enjoy is what the community is going to enjoy. And ultimately, from a business perspective, which I think is underlying in your question, is why bother investing in urban parks and open spaces? And it's really because it's just a part of what, as Mark said, like what a good urban experience is. I think there's probably some 60s or 70s, and maybe 50s image of what a city and suburbia is, and there's nature, and there's sort of that very tripartite division. I think that's really blurry, and I think it's a wonderful thing that we're blurring that more and more. And so we love participating in that because it's good for our employees, which is accretive to why they want to come to the office, right? We know we're in an environment right now where we believe it's really important to be with each other and to be back together with our teams. And so the more we can do to create environments around that, not just within our spaces that we control in our buildings, but in the whole environment where we stitch ourselves in. And that's led to, and I can share maybe more later if you'd like, but more about our urban strategy and how we've actually placed our buildings, the work that we've done, and significant gymnastics with cities to figure out how to work within the code and the zoning to create spaces that maybe are a little bit more unique than what sort of might be just allowed by taking the code at face value. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. So you've all talked a bit about how your organizations knit in with the community, why this is important to you. And maybe I'll start with Mari, and I asked you your second question first, so my apologies for that. That's a moderator mess up, but all these guys represent governments and nonprofit organizations, perhaps other businesses. Can you talk a little bit about how partnerships matter to you? And I know you've actually partnered with other panelists that are up here. So, and the Kraken, I mean, we've had an 85-year-old organization, a 50-year-old organization, a 30-ish-year-old organization, I'm not sure exact age of Amazon, and 4 with the Kraken. So, and you've made a big splash since coming here. So talk a little bit about that and anything else you would have covered if I'd asked you the right question first.
Thank you. We are big believers in partnerships and collaborations with nonprofits, with corporate partners, with other pro teams. We have a great pro team community, and also very much with the public sector. And since we're talking about parks, one example of how we partner with parks departments and parks foundations is to advance our environmental justice agenda and also our focus on play equity and access to play. the keynote yesterday morning was talking about, and you all know better than anyone, how being outside, and we've all said it, and being active and having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and clean and safe places to gather and play is fundamental to the physical and mental health of all young people, but that there's this marked gap between which young people have those spaces and environments and which don't, often dictated by zip code, household income, and primary language spoken at home. And so one of the ways we're trying to advance our play equity work is bringing hockey to places where it hasn't been, to introduce it to new communities, to introduce the sport in our brand, but also just increase access to play. And so what we'll do is work with Seattle Parks and Recreation, King County Parks, Tacoma, Metro Parks Tacoma, to kind of tack onto an existing redevelopment plan. So for example, we do these multi-sport courts like rave, except at a much less aggressive pace. But we will go in and partner with a parks department and the community, and we will then pay for, underwrite these multi-sport stanchions and infrastructure that support basketball, futsal, and ball hockey. And then we'll donate equipment and help with activations, and we commission a local artist to create like a neighborhood branded version of the Kraken One Roof brand. So it's not, a flag planting, it's more of a holistic community collective. And so the first sport court we did that was in Skyway Park with King County Parks last year. In January, we broke ground in Verlo Playfield in Tacoma with Metro Parks Tacoma, Virginia Mason Franciscan Health, and the league. And then we're working with Seattle Parks and Recreation to build a sport court in South Park with the new community center redevelopment. So it is something we couldn't do on our own. But we can bring hockey, they don't have that piece of it. So it's like, what is our unique value proposition? Where can we lean in, and how can we make what is the 1 + 1 = 3? And only if the Parks Department says, yes, we want that, and then if the community says, yes, we want that, then. So that's an example.
Great. Well, I got to say that a real example of how Kraken has entered Seattle, which is not a deep hockey town compared to the East Coast, where I lived for 4 years. They brought skating back. They took a mall that was struggling, and it's now got, is it 4? Three.
Mm-hmm.
Three skating rinks. And I know my daughter's dance instructor from middle school and high school is now skating there regularly and back into her childhood figure skating. It has brought skating back to Seattle. It's put it on the radar, and it's taken a facility that was really dying in its former form and completely redeveloped it into quite an amazing ice skating complex. So
since you mentioned that, I do have to mention then, so One Roof Foundation offers financial assistance to take part in those classes, learn to skate and learn to play, with, again, the focus of trying to diversify the game of hockey. Unlike soccer, this is not yet a universal sport. It is not historically representative or that inclusive. And in our financial assistance program, 85% of the participants are kids of color and 52% are girls. So we're feeling good about the trends, and we have a long way to go.
terrific. Well, I think we'll stay with a sports theme for a minute, and maybe both of you could comment if you want, but Seattle is a larger community. There are smaller communities around. Mari referenced some of them. Sounders and the RAIN, working with the Ray Foundation, you've got a pretty audacious goal for 2026. Sounds like you're maybe a little ahead of it. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also what you're learning in that effort and partnerships that have helped?
Sure. So Ray Foundation is the official charitable partner of both the Sounders and soon to be also the RAIN. We have to have a board meeting to formalize that relationship. But we started in 2013, and it was really our majority owner, Adrian Hanauer, who said, hey, this is crazy. Everywhere else in the world, soccer is played in just pick-up free play. And in this country, as we all know, pay-to-play sports are the model. How do we fix that? And so it started with this concept of, okay, could we go build what we call mini pitches in communities, and the magic and the trick is dedicate them to be open for free play. I think one of the things, you all coming from the parks community, and we have this legacy of legislation and municipal code that uses bond measures or other financial mechanisms to build infrastructure for sports, whether it's ball fields or courts. And then as a condition of that, you rent them out. We rent them out because those rental fees pay for ongoing maintenance and support of those facilities. And that model makes great financial fiscal sense. But what tends to happen in places like South Park is when the field gets rebuilt and an all-weather surface, I grew up playing on Syntrex and all sport dirt, which froze in January and was basically concrete. But when turf goes in to some of these communities, the first people that show up are the people who can afford to rent it. And then what happens over time? Historical use, priority use. And so you could get a community like South Park where a beautiful field is built and the houses around it are populated by humans and kids who never have access to it because it's rented from the minute the lights go on after school until the lights go off at 9 p.m. And so how do we build small fields that aren't rentable because we could call them playgrounds instead of fields and get out from sort of the municipal code. And so it took us a while to find some willing partners. It was the Seattle Parks Foundation and Seattle Parks and Seattle Housing Authority at Yesler Terrace, which was looking at a different model for public space in the heart of a revitalization and development, right? Yesler Terrace was the first desegregated housing site in the city of Seattle. It was some of the buildings that were there were originally there from the 40s, and so it was Seattle Housing Authority's mission to sort of revitalize not only the density, but work with the private sector, and at the middle was a park. And there was a lack of funding for this park. No one really wanted to come to the Bear to do the last little bit of funding. And we had been sniffing around it for a couple years and got a call and said, okay, they're now willing to talk about sort of if this was open and dedicated for free play. And it's because of sort of multiple agencies coming to the table and being willing to think differently about the legislative intent of some of these legacy municipal sort of realities that allowed us to do our first demonstration field at Yesler Terrace, which is not a full-size pitch. And in fact, one of the things that you heard Mari talk about and you heard others on the panel talk about is this constant sort of a need to not be the patriarchal, patronizing, here is your gift mentality, but we sat with community for 2.5 years in Yesler because we knew that if we built a rectangular space and put goals on the end of it, that kids would figure out how to play soccer. The demographics of the community, a largely immigrant community, every single building has 4 or 5 or 6 translated building meetings because of the nature of the humans that live there. And we listened. And one of the things we heard was this would just be great if it could be a place where we could put a picnic out. This would be great if it's a place where the Tai Chi Club could get together on Saturday mornings. And so we didn't put soccer lines on that first pitch. And it was profoundly impactful to how we've thought about every single place we've shown up in, because yes, it's a soccer pitch, and yes, we want kids to use it. We're building them on schoolyards because we know that from the Play Equity Coalition's work that Mari and I are both involved in, King County got a D, and even with all the access to place, King County got a D in terms of access for kids to play, which is insane. And we know that if we invest and make elementary schools the hubs of physical activity, the same way that they often serve as convening agents for social services across family dimensions, whether it's food insecurity, health, and dental care, mental health resources, that elementary schools can also be that hub. But every elementary school is a little bit different. Every community is a little bit different. And so it has to start with an inquiry of how can soccer help? And it all goes back to that first field at Yesler Terrace and having a bunch of people sit around a table and be willing to think about it differently, park our most pecuniary needs at the door and come together in a way knowing, yes, soccer is played at Yesler Terrace, but footballs are thrown around. I don't know if hockey is played there. And grandmas come and lay a blanket out and sit and have a picnic. And that's all intentional. And so it's allowed us to more quickly get to other places. Sally, you mentioned it. We had a commitment to do 26 small fields and mini pitches across the state of Washington by 2026 when the World Cup comes here. We're gonna probably hit that this year. 2 years early, and probably closer to 40. And it's inclusive not only of urban centers like Yesler Terrace right here in the city of Seattle, but Moses Lake, Spokane. We have 4 in Yakima, Pasco, Olympia. We're looking at Kitsap Peninsula, and every single one of those places has a different answer to how can soccer help. But we can use soccer as that catalytic convening agent for equity.
Super. Thank you, Maya. So I'm going to go to Shannon because this relates a lot to what we were talking about, and it's about listening to communities, listening to their needs. So could you talk a little bit about Amazon and your interest in public space projects, including, I mean, you've done work here, South Lake Union, the Seattle Waterfront, East Trail in Bellevue, which is a multi-use trail. How do you work with communities, and how do you make sure those are well aligned, your interests and theirs?
Yeah, I think every community is different in the sense that you have some that are well out in front and leading and very, I'll just sort of say, sophisticated and mature and assertive about what their needs are, well defined. And there's often just gaps, right? So there's, for example, I think that's very true with the East Link that you just referenced, where there was clearly a funding gap to complete this link. And for those that don't know, roughly, forgive me, but roughly 40 miles connecting more or less Snohomish to Renton, multi-use purpose trail. This is a rail-to-trail adaptive reuse. And it goes through significant both post-industrial as well as now urban areas and some private lands as well. And there was the Wilburton Trestle, which required, among other contributors, $5 million from Amazon to make that connection. This is a trestle that's actually quite beautiful if people have time to go out to the Wilburton neighborhood on the east side near Bellevue. And so in some ways, that's sort of one of our roles, is to really listen and see where there are gaps. And then there are others where I think we play a more perhaps leadership role in leading and guiding how we might think about how communities can consider what we might do to support their needs. So for example, within South Lake Union, you mentioned, while we can debate the wisdom of what we didn't choose with our South Lake Union Park and the Commons with Paul Allen, Amazon had an opportunity to begin to put a significant footprint there. And I was actually representing the public sector side at the time. I was not yet an employee. I was working for myself, but also as a commissioner for the Seattle Design Commission, and listening to Amazon presenting the idea that it wanted to vacate a public alley. And now that's a very big deal to go out in front and say, look, we'd like to take over some public land. And they made the case for why they could orient the buildings differently to create much more light down onto the public ground plane, to orient buildings in a way that allow for a taller structure, but narrower at the ground floor, also creating more public open space. By doing so, they would also allow for greater connection of infrastructure, which eventually becomes bike lanes. So there's all kinds of reasons why this public trade was important. Now that's actually quite a challenge, and so in some ways there's a really good tension there between public and private sector that I think is worthy. And that tension created a great public benefit, or a series of public benefits that have now become, for us, what we call Day One Park. That's right between two of our primary buildings down in that neighborhood in South Lake Union that's open to the public. Everything from very simple daily benefits like the banana stand, which are free bananas for folks, as well as more involved programming that happens like concerts and markets. So I think it depends on the circumstance, but 2 examples.
Super. I've been by the banana stand. It's pretty nice. I suggest you all go there. It's not far. Block or 2. All right, and Mark, I'm going to give you a question with a little bit different twist, because in addition, when we first started working together, we were working largely in government affairs and policy, and we both served in the Obama administration, different parts of it, Department of Commerce before Mark came here via Microsoft, as I recall. But REI's, supported trails and stewardship for a long time, but it connects with advocacy work and government work. And can you make that connection for us, the importance of engaging with government in terms of achieving the mission you'd like to see in both public lands as well as urban public space investment.
Yeah, happy to. It's a fun part of the profession, and we were actually talking beforehand about the hand-in-glove relationship that exists between people in companies who are doing community investment on the one hand, and then talking to government on how best to deploy that type of community investment. And I have a couple lived examples from REI, some started by my team. Rebecca Baer will remember, and Sally, you might remember Matt Little. He was an outreach specialist in Washington, D.C., and he was sort of our eyes and ears on the ground. And Matt called up one day and said, "Have you ever been to D.C.?" And I had lived there for a bunch of years, and so it was an easy conversation. And he said, "This place is crazy. We have so many jurisdictions. We have Washington, D.C., we have Prince George's County, Montgomery County in Maryland, we have Arlington County, City of Alexandria. And those jurisdictions all come together with D.C. in the hub." And he said, "The bike lanes don't match. They don't connect to each other. You might want to ride your bike from Alexandria to D.C., and you're going to get stuck because the governments haven't melded the network together." I said, "Matt, I get it. 5 jurisdictions, 2 states, 1 federal jurisdiction, that's a hard putt." He said, "Can we get $15,000 for coffee and donuts?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There are groups here who want to fix that problem, and we just need a place to meet, and they can meet at the REI store, but as probably as good host, we should buy some coffee and donuts." And so for a couple of years with Washington Area Bike Association, they got together and they did some planning. They called, or Matt called back a couple of years later, and he said, "We got something going here. We're going to create the Capitol Trails Coalition and formalize this organization of organizations. Could we 10x the donation?" I'm like, "Oh, God." So we do, but at some point, you sort of get past the private sector's wherewithal. But Capitol Trails Coalition persisted, and eventually with the passage of some of these infrastructure laws, the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, over the past few years, monies are being unlocked from the federal government. And lo and behold, more than $10 million is coming from federal funds and being matched by local government funds. And they are going to execute against the map of connected bike lanes across the DC area that had been spawned over coffee and donuts 10 years prior. So trying to stitch that together with these comments, I see the role of the private sector as catalytic. We're here to provide catalyst, and we have, depending on our business, maybe a different vision. But I tried my hand at soccer. I tried my hand at hockey. That didn't go so well. And now, my kids love team sports, and they love, climbing in the Cascades. And so I guess the point is, if you're sitting in the not-for-profit sector or the government sector, know that there are corporate citizens out there who are interested in finding relationships, meeting people where they are to do good work in community, but also understand that our role might be catalytic, convening, supporting, having an idea, but it would be the larger community that brings it all together. And I guess, to bring it fast forward to present day, there's stuff still happening in Congress that we work on, so that when those additional capital area trail coalitions opportunities come up, they can get funded. Some of these infrastructure monies, they might get clawed back in the next Congress. So our lobbying team is very active with not-for-profits, other business entities, stealing ourselves for the prospect of a clawback, and we'll resist that very strongly. We're also working in the last days of this Congress to pass a piece of legislation, part of which, the Outdoors for All Act, would put hundreds of millions of federal dollars into green space in urban areas specifically. And so again, the role of the private sector, the advocates, is to be there in the mix as an aid, as a catalyst, but often enough, since these are public spaces, public assets, the big hammer is going to come down when the government actually provides the financial support.
Super. So we've heard a lot from this panel. I know we're out of time. I'm just going to say a few words of recap in everything that we've heard. One is, it is about listening to community needs. And I think all of the organizations that our panelists represent have done that very effectively. But I would say for those of you in those communities, work with your local businesses, help them understand what your needs are, and there may be that intersection of interests. And we've heard about why open spaces are important to all four of these organizations. It is about the health of your communities. It is about creating a great place for your employees to choose to be. It is about building your business for the future, whether it is people that know how to skate that didn't before, or play soccer, or people that may not have thought about recreating outdoors as a part of their business, employees that recognize they can work at a great company that cares about the place that they live in. And we've also heard that working with partners, nonprofit partners, through foundations, which and philanthropic efforts, and working with partners is critically important. So thank you all for the work that you do. Please join me in thanking our great panelists for the work that they do.